Hi, welcome to Delaware Studios. Let's get to create a reminder alarm application. You'll be using extensively the Alarm Manager, in which you'll be learning the basic CRUD implementation to set up a reminder and how to set up exact and repeating alarms for reminders saved to the SQLite database. Also, how to set up notification with the alarm service that triggers an intent to desired calling activity. Let's get started. I have the source right there in the Android Studio, and I'll be taking you through on how to create an alarm reminder application in Android. Let's straight to the build Gradle, the module app session, where we'll look at the dependencies included. You have to include the Android support design. This is 25.3.1 version. You can use the version suit or the version you have installed right there in your Android SDK. You also need to include the recycler view. You might need the floating action button from GetBase, but you have that right there out of the box from the support design. You need to include the material date time picker so as to select the desired reminder date and time. You might need the recycler view multi-select to select from the big now branch Android library. Also, the float label edit text, that's for if you actually want to add more fields to your form while taking up the reminder, and so on. So you have that set up, and you sync your dependency to set up your application. From here, we'll be looking at the layout needed. We have the activity add reminder, which is like the editor to add specific or different reminders as well. It's actually going to be editing any added reminder into the SQLite database. The activity main, which is the launcher, and the alarm items, which will be attached to the recycler view. Starting with the activity main, you can see that right there from the preview. So with that, you should understand what we're expecting, and the floating action button is at the bottom right corner. This is wrapped around the relative layout, and we have a toolbar which is actually going to house the menu and some other aspects, followed by a list view with an ID of list with night match parent below the toolbar, and there is a relative layout of an empty view which has a text that click on the button below to begin creating your reminder. That's when you launch the application for the first time. You will have that text telling you to click on the floating action button to set up your reminder. And we have the floating action button widget with the layout with tonight wrap content, the align parent bottom to the true, and the same thing to the right true, with a margin of 16 dp, and the source calling from the drawable ICRD. You have that set up from the vector graphics, and a background theme, setting a background, a color to the floating action button, calling the color primary, with the fab size of normal. You can decide to use small and large, but normal will be okay. So you have your activity main set up this way. Let's look at the activity add a reminder before we get to look at the items that was actually sit right there on the list view. Quick expansion of this will make you understand what you're expecting. Now this starts with the relative layout, and if you notice, you have a toolbar over there that's actually going to house the delete and the add button for you to actually trigger those actions on the reminder input. You have a linear layout wrapped around the reminder text title, which has an edit text of the title, and the hint is the reminder. At least a reminder must have a title, so that's is actually going to hold on to the title that you're actually specifying for that particular reminder. And now other items of the attributes of the reminder you're adding to the database will be wrapped around a scroll view. This is actually going to help smaller screens. If you're developing any UI in Android, it's better you start with small screens before you move to large screens. That will be much easier for you. And this sits below the reminder layout top, which is the reminder text with a linear layout, and the first attribute of the linear layout is a text view, which houses details. We have another one for the date of the reminder, side by side with an image view, all wrapped inside the relative layout. We have another linear layout right there with the date and text view with a set date, the closing relative layout, another opening relative layout now with a time, date and time. We have for the previous date, this is for time, with the image view, and which is like a small icon. You have that set up. We have another layout for the repeat icon or the repeat text. So it's actually going to tell us are we repeating or not with a toggle button. If you can see that right there at the right corner, to either toggle to true or false. We are actually using a switch to make that happen. So on click of this switch will trigger the on switch repeat method. We get to look at that in the editor. We have another relative layout right there, which is for the repeat interval. That's the repetition you have. Is it once? Is it twice? How many times you really want to repeat this particular alarm? And the last one will be the repeat type. Is in hours? Is in minutes? That will actually trigger the repetition of this particular reminder. So those are the metadata that will be picking out for different reminders. And we have the floating action button to actually set if you want a reminder for this particular alarm, if you want an alarm rather for this particular reminder or not. So on click of the first, you're going to have this setup, which is going to like be activated, and on the second click, it's actually going to look grayish, like deactivated. So this is actually going to be two states. Are you setting an alarm for this reminder, or are you not setting an alarm? You just want a mere reminder without an alarm. So that two floating action button is going to undo those states. So we have that set up right there in the activity add reminder. The alarm items are basics. These are the items we want to see right there on the list view. The image view, which is actually going to be a circle with the first alphabet of the title of the reminder just seated in the middle, and a linear layout wrapped around the content of the reminder, where we have the title, we have the date and time of that particular reminder, we have the repeat information, the repeat type, number and type. How many times are you repeating, and what type of repetition are you doing? And an image view to depict if an alarm is set up for this reminder or not. If it's set up, it's actually going to be activated, but if not, the alarm icon will look grayish. With that, you should understand what you will be doing right there in the Java classes, and this is actually a building block to what you'll be expecting. Heading straight to the Java classes, we have two subpackage. You'll be setting up the data subpackage, which will house the contract, the DB helper, and the provider, because you're actually going to be implementing the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete on the reminder. And another subpackage is a reminder subpackage where you have the alarm service and the scheduler and also some other aspects where you need to schedule the alarm and the alarm provider. In the alarm reminder package, you have the add reminder activity, the alarm cursor adapter, which is actually going to bind data to the views, which will be showed right in the list view, and the main activity, which is the launcher. Start up with the main activity. This extends the app compact activity and implements the loader manager, calling the loader callbacks, passing the cursor as the generic parameter here. When you set up this way, you need to override few methods: the onCreate loader, the onload finished, and onloader reset. But before going deeper there, you need to set up some fields. Firstly, for the floating action button, you're expecting the toolbar from the main activity main. You set up the cursor adapter and the list view object. If you want to use a progress dialog as well, you can set up that. In the onCreate method, set the content view to the activity main, initialize the toolbar, and set support action bar to the toolbar, and also you can set the title to the toolbar. If you notice, the title here is alarm reminder. Now you also initialize the reminder list view, which is the list view, calling its ID list. You have that right in activity main. And now you need to handle the empty view, also call its appropriate ID. You can use a button knife to actually get that done out of the box as well. Now we'll be setting the empty view to the reminder list view, passing the empty view object as a parameter. You have the cursor adapter here, which actually binds data, and pass the this and null as the two parameters you'll be pushing down to the cursor adapter to trigger the cursor adapter constructor. Set the adapter to the cursor adapter object created. That will be set down to the list view. Now on click of the list view item, where you instantiate the adapter view on item click listener, you need to override a method called on item click, and this takes adapter view for the position and the ID as the parameters you will be using based on the position of different list item. On click of each list item, you trigger an intent that pushes to the add reminder activity. Probably you want to update that particular reminder, and you create a current URI for that with appended URI, and this is actually going to call the content URI and its ID. We'll get to look at the content URI right there in the data subpackage. And now the floating action button, you set up the ID, the FAB, and you have the object. You set an on-click listener to that, the floating action button, and that also will trigger the add reminder activity. Now this is not going to pass any content URI because this is actually going to be a fresh data you are about saving to the SQLite database. On create loader, you have the projection you want to actually upload or you want to display to the list view. You're calling all columns, the ID, title, key date, time, repeat, number, type, and if it's active or not. Instantiating the cursor loader, pass the content URI, the projection, which is the columns, and if you have sort order, and the selection clause and arguments, you can set that to null. On load finish, you swap the cursor from the cursor adapter and pass the cursor, which is the bunch of database query results, and on loader reset, you pass null to the swap cursor. That's for the main activity, which is actually going to display the list item of the reminders. Let's get to look at the data sub package, where we create the contract, the DB helper, and the provider. In the contract, we will need to set up the columns which we'll be saving data to in the SQLite database. We have the content authority, which is the package name we are using, and the base content URI pointing to the content authority. We now have a path to a table. You can give it any path name, call it reminder path, and an inner class which is called alarm reminder entry, which implements the base column. And this time you append path to the content URI. To create a content URI, you append the path to the base content URI and also to the reminder path you created. You can set up a content list type and also the content item type if you desire. We have a table name, which we can give it a different name or any name you feel like. And now let's set up the columns needed in that table. The first column is the ID, followed by the title, the date, time, repeat number, repeat type, and the repeat, and the key active if the alarm is set up for that particular reminder or not. And this is like a helper method to get the column string of a particular index. So this can be used with all index, because if you notice, it gets the string, and we are basically going to use string throughout the columns. So we have the helper method here to shorten the call. Looking at the reminder DB helper, where we're going to actually create our table. It extends the SQLite open helper, and we have the database name, also the database version, and the alarm reminder DB helper constructor. It only takes a context as a parameter and called on the super class and passing those attributes, the database name and the database version. Now in the onCreate method, because once you extend the SQLite open helper, you override two methods, the onCreate and the onUpgrade. Cool. We have a string which will be triggered when you are executing the SQL that creates the table with their appropriate columns and also with their data type. If you notice, all are text, not null, except the ID, which is an integer, and a parameter auto increment. Now you execute the SQL statement here. On upgrade, you may decide to drop the table and create it again. That sets up the reminder DB helper. Now the reminder provider, which is the underlying setup on top of your SQLite database. So this will help you access data from the database. You extend the content provider, as you're familiar with. We've done content provider extensively in multiple videos in my channel. You can lay your hands on it if you're just joining us, or if you're just getting yourself with content provider. Now we have the reminder, that's for a single and for all reminders right in the database. Now the static finder, where you want to create the URI matcher. This points to the content authority, to the path, and the reminder. The second URI matcher, the content authority, to the path, which is the table, and the reminder with an ID, with this wildcard. Now we have the onCreate where we initialize the DB helper object. Once you extend the content provider, you will override a couple of methods: the query, the update, the get type, and the delete and the insert methods. Those methods you have to override them, and you have to set up what you really need them to do. So in the query method, we have two cases here for the reminder and the reminder with ID. This is where we get to query the database, and our query string will look like this. You call on the table name, the projection, the selection, and the selection argument. You can also have a sort order as well if you are passing them down into the query parameters, and you pass that to the cursor, which is going to be a bunch of data. The same thing goes with the reminder ID, and you have to set notification, get context, get content resolver, and pass it to URI so that it's actually going to display immediately the query is being finished. You have the get type or type. We have two types: the reminder and the reminder with an ID. Calling the content list type we created in the contract, and the content item type. In the insert, we're only going to insert to the reminder, and this triggers an inner method called the insert reminder, passing two parameters, the URI and the content values. We have that set up here, and this is actually going to insert into the database the table name and the values. You should understand that. Let's get to look at the delete. You can delete all the reminders, or you can delete a specific reminder. So that's the different URI matching we're looking at. So this triggers the delete method based on the table name, the selection, and its arguments. And in the reminder now, we must have a particular selection, which is actually going to pick up the ID, which is unique to all entries. The selection argument, which column are you pointing at, and you must return the rows that were deleted. So you have that set up. And in the update method, probably you want to update a particular reminder data. For all reminders, you pass in URI, content values, selection, and the selection argument. But majorly, when you're updating, you'll be updating for a particular reminder. And this is actually going to take a selection, which is the ID, and the selection argument, which is actually going to pass the ID to its URI. So you have value for the selection and the selection argument, and the content you are updating with the specific URI, which is generic, or which is unique to a particular reminder. And now we have an inner method that is actually going to make the update, which gets reference to the get writable database, and the update will be triggered on those parameters set up. So these are the CRUD implementation: the create, read, update, and delete. Extensively, you'll be needing them almost in any Android application. From here, we'll be looking at the add reminder activity. In the add reminder activity, this is where the bunch of logic is being handled. This is actually going to handle two things: a fresh reminder, and the second, an update of a particular reminder. So we should understand we're expecting two things here to be done here. It implements the time picker dialog on time sets listener, and also the date picker dialog on date select listener, which calls the loader manager with the loader callbacks. We have a bunch of fields here. Firstly, the key to the existing loader. We have a toolbar set up, the edit text view, floating action button, calendar, the switch for the repeat toggle. Also, we create some fields here. That's some variable for the title, time, date, repeat, and so on. We also have for the current reminder URI, which is actually going to let us know if this is an already saved data to the database. We have values for the retention changes, where we're going to actually handle this on saved instance state to actually save the persistent state when you even change the orientation to landscape. And the constants we'll be using here converted to milliseconds. This is a timing we'll be using. And let's get to look at the body of this activity. In the onCreate method, you set the content view to the activity add reminder. That's fine. And you get the intent triggered, and now the current reminder URI, which actually calls the intent get data. This if you are actually calling this particular activity from the list view, that's from a selected item of the reminder. Definitely there will be a current reminder URI created. Now you check if the current URI is null. Set the title as add reminder details. That's if it's null, definitely it's a new reminder you are about to put into the database. But else, if it's not, you set the title of the toolbar to edit reminder. So this is the logic we're handling here. So if it's not null, you have the edit. So you get to edit that particular details. And that's when you trigger the loader to actually display the content, the metadata of that particular item down to the fields, so that you'll be able to edit that particular attribute. So the loader will be triggered at this point in time when the current reminder URI is not null. Now let's initialize views. The toolbar, you call the IDs with the floating action body as well. And you initialize default values. Cool.